dedicated things. What does he call them? Spoils. He calls them spoils. Yeah. How are we doing, Mel? I'm not going to be that loud the whole time, am I? Okay. All right. So and here's one of the things that we need to know, because this is one of the ways I think that Satan really does work, and we have to pay attention because you can see that there's strategies, things that Satan will do in his efforts to try and knock us off course and try and make the followers of God fall into sin and break away from God. We were talking during prayer, and I always think of it this way: when the thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy, right? And I believe that that's really Satan's whole plan for us, to steal us away, to kill us, and to destroy us from being in relationship with God. And ultimately, he's looking at our hearts. And how does God do that? And I think one of the first techniques and strategies that Satan utilizes whenever he looks to gain any ground with us is he tries to change the terms. Does that make sense to you guys? He tries to change the way that we either perceive something or call it, or he changes the name of it. Do you guys know, can name that technique at all in the Bible, how Satan would try and do that, or we can see him trying to do that? With the tree? Yeah. He wants to get into kind of, oh my goodness, it's totally escaping me. But he's like, let's analyze the actual words that God said, right? Because maybe you misunderstood them. So let's maybe change your understanding of the words that God really said. What else do we think? Is there anywhere else? Jesus in the desert? How so, Mason? Yeah. Yeah, your physical needs, right? God must not care about your physical needs. I can take care of your physical needs, right? All it'll cost you is this. Yeah. How do we see it today? Do we see that same strategy being utilized today? Mason? Okay. All right. Culture is going after those days that used to be probably 30 years ago were protected days of the week. Yeah. Okay. Media? How do we see it in the media? Okay. It's a false reality that's getting shown on social media. All right. How else do you think? What's that? Yeah. Some of the laws that really looked at protecting some of the sanctity of worship on Sundays. Yeah, we can see that. We're even getting to a point now in the American church where pastors have to be careful of what message they're preaching behind the pulpit, because if you are strict to the Bible, preaching the Bible, you can really offend some people, right? And people that we're finding that are being offended are people who identify as Christians. And it starts coming into this idea of, let's not outright call something that the Bible would call sin. Let's always make sure that we're being loving whenever we talk about this thing. And in this regard, loving means not calling sin as the Bible describes it, right? We see that. Let's start changing terms, and let's try and reclassify this so that it suits our purpose. This is where adultery becomes an affair, right? Perversion becomes a lifestyle. Theft becomes an entitlement. Here we see what Achan says. He uses this word, I saw, I coveted, I took. And this is really the same thinking, the same order that occurred with Eve in the garden as well. It was that same order. I saw, I coveted, I took. And so these are recognizable patterns, which means they are recognizable to you and I now. We're not unaware of these patterns when we see them happening, right? We know how this plays out. The funny thing is it seems like more than anything, we see that Satan tries to attack us by the things that we see, us kind of looking at things and then finding some sort of wrong relationship with those things, coveting them. And in that regard, coveting them becomes idolatry because we lift that desired thing over a place that God should have, or a place that God has spoken into in our own lives, right? Okay, we'll keep going on now. So how do we stop this whole cycle? How do we combat this? Well, Paul would tell us in 2 Corinthians 10:5, he says, "We destroy arguments and every lofty opinion raised against the knowledge of God and take every thought captive to obey Christ." Every thought captive. All right, Achan was robbing God. The question here is, do we ever do that? Do we rob God with taking of the first fruits and translating it into spoils? Okay, let's not put the screws to you guys too tightly there. Let's move on, okay? All right, Joshua, verse 22, chapter 7. "So Joshua sent messengers, and they ran to the tent, and behold, it was hidden in his tent with the silver underneath. And they took them out of the tent and brought them to Joshua and to all the people of Israel, and they laid them down before the Lord. And Joshua and all Israel with him took Achan, son of Zerah, and the silver and the cloak and the bar of gold, and his sons and daughters and his oxen and donkeys and sheep and his tent, and all that he had. And they brought them up to the valley of Achor. And Joshua said, 'Why did you bring trouble on us? The Lord brings trouble on you today.'" So here is wordplay happening right now, because in Hebrew the word for trouble is Achor. So this valley of Achor is getting its name from this incident here. Why did you bring trouble? And knowing that this name is in close proximity to Achan's actual name here is troubler. And you realize that there is some wordplay that's happening here with Joshua, that Joshua is using. Now, what did God say was going to happen to the offender in this case? Do you guys remember? Supposed to be burned. Yeah, but instead, here it says, "And all Israel stoned him with stones. They burned them with fire and stoned them with stones." So there is a burning that happens, but what's the first thing that happens? Stoning. And we talked about this before. Stoning is usually the penalty for what? For blasphemy. For blasphemy. So let me ask you, this action by the Israelites to now stone Achan and his family and his oxen and his donkeys, was this a suitable response by the Israelites? Was this accurate to do, this case of stoning? What do you guys think? If blasphemy is usually the call for stoning, was this a correct use of stoning? Can you make a case for it? Blasphemy. We could almost look at the commandments here. Well, you guys tell me, was this a proper case for stoning? Mason? Mm-hmm. It's close? Okay. So, Mason, the 10 Commandments, chapter 20, Exodus, verse 7, you shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not hold anyone guiltless who misuses his name. What is it? Usually we say, thou shalt not what? Take the Lord's name in vain. What do we usually attribute that to? Cursing, right? Oh, you just used God's name in a curse, and you just broke the third commandment. Do you think that's accurate 100% to what the scripture, what this commandment is saying? What is it actually saying, Zeb, do you think? Okay, yeah, I like that. Ascribing your will to something when it's ascribing it to God's will when it's actually your will. Okay, what else do we think? Yeah, yeah, okay, I like that. Mm-hmm. So God doesn't stipulate here that stoning should be a part of this. He says burn, right? He says burn, which they do eventually do. But the first thing, their first action here, John, is stoning. And so we know if stoning is usually used, it's meant to be used with blasphemy, right? Yeah, yeah, and that's the question here. That's why I want to take us to this third commandment in the Ten Commandments, because I think what we misunderstand sometimes is taking the Lord's name in vain is really is more akin to where Zeb's going with this. And I think it's when you are identifying something to God and then you're not, that it's not of God, right? So how about this? How about when we identify ourselves publicly as Christians and then behave a different way in public? Are we taking the Lord's name in vain? It's a misrepresentation. I am a God follower. Now I'm going to go and do these actions, which are not what a God follower would do. Are you guys tracking? John, are you tracking on that? That maybe taking God's name in vain? Okay. So these Israelites here, these people who've just consecrated themselves, preparing for Jericho, now have turned around to Ai, and they're supposed to be committed to the Lord, yet what does this committed person, and he drags his entire family along with him, what does he do? He does something counter to the instructions of the Lord. He's not behaving as somebody who belongs to God, right? Who's not living under that rule. Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. It could be. It could be your performance and your actions can be blasphemous actions. That's what I'm saying. So I think when we do look at stoning here, it is in line with some of the punishment. You're supposed to be this. You're not behaving that way. You've been declared this way. You've consecrated yourself, and then you immediately turned around and did something that was counter to that consecration, setting yourself apart. Mm-hmm.
And it was actually something that everybody could actually participate in very easily
Mm-hmm.
versus crucifixion or some other means of.
Yeah. Well, even burning somebody, right? You have to prepare. For stoning, you don't have to prepare. You just simply have to pick up, right? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. We'll get back on it here. All right. So one of the things to note here is it seems like whenever in history, in the Bible, God it reveals his wrath whenever there's kind of a new period happening within the history in the Bible. So think about it this way. After the tabernacle had just been set up, we get this story of those two Levites, Nadab and Abihu, who are using the what is the term for it? What kind of fire is it? Because I know the ESV doesn't call it that kind of fire. Leviticus 10, 1 through 2, now Nadab and Abihu, the sons of Aaron, each took his censer and put fire in it and laid incense on it and offered unauthorized or strange fire before the Lord, which he had not commanded them. And fire came out from before the Lord and consumed them, and they died before the Lord. So this unauthorized, let me pull that up really quick. Do you guys know sometimes when you learn something in like the King James, when you were a kid and you learned a memory verse in the King James, and then you hear it again in a different translation and you're like, that's not right. Let me just go to the King James and just see. Maybe it is this word strange ultimately that I'm thinking of, but they did something that was not permitted. Do you know what it was, Dick? It was strange. You have the New King James. The New King James does a lot of correction on the King James. Strange fire is what the King James says. So, okay, maybe that was it. So you think about this beginning part of the tabernacle, right at the beginning of this time period for them, somebody does something wrong. And so what does God do? He responds in a dramatic fashion, and he says, no, I told you guys, this is a special moment. This is not how we take our first steps. Think about that when David moves the ark from its place of honor and it's now residing, it's being moved to the temple. And David has it moved with what? Is it priests carrying it on a pole? How are they transporting the ark? By cart, oxen pulling it, and then it goes to fall, and then Uzzah reaches out to stabilize it, right? This isn't being transported the way it's supposed to be, and this is the penalty when things go wrong. Or look at this in the book of Acts, right after the birth of the church. We talked about this last week with Ananias and Sapphira, right? The church is just starting. People are coming together, and they're collectively pouring their hearts into the formation of this new body of believers, of Christ followers. And then now as the church is just starting, you get this husband and wife who say they're giving their full tithe, but are actually holding back. They're not telling the whole story. And God responds in a dramatic fashion. It's because we are entering in, this is the first example of a new period of history within this Bible. And we see that God reacts very, very dramatically in these moments. All right, let's continue on. Joshua 7, verse 26. And they raised him over a great heap of stones that remained, or they raised over him a great heap of stones that remains to this day. Then the Lord turned from his burning anger. Therefore, to this day, the name of that place is called the Valley of Achor. And we see that Achor in time, though, by the time we get to the prophet Isaiah, we get to Hosea, that this valley actually starts becoming a place that has hope and is starting to signify something other than being a time of trouble. All right, so let's just keep going here, and we're going to move on. What has Joshua learned so far through this whole thing, coming up to this point now? What is he really learning about this fatal mistake that's happened to him? What are the lessons that he's pulling away right now? Can he go into battle thinking he can simply do the last thing that he did. No. What is he supposed to do every time he goes into battle? Consult the Lord, right? Go to prayer, consult the Lord. This isn't about your plan. This isn't about a plan that worked in the past. And then we see disobedience, right? That this disobedience, this poor action of Joshua actually has a bigger effect to it. It has a rippling effect, right? Because this now has created an environment that they moved in brokenness. And so what do you expect to happen but yet more brokenness with Achan? And that's what we see happening. Sometimes, and I got to ask you guys this question, because I'll see it when I'm driving. You'll be on a long road trip, right? And you'll be driving and everybody's doing fine. Say there's a car ahead of you, a car behind you, and you guys are driving a certain speed limit. Everybody's happy. There's a safe buffer. If people are coming along, they just pass. But then you'll get one Yahoo who is like, it is not enough to just pass these people, but I'm going to go about 20 miles faster than everybody else. And they just zip by you, right? You guys know this situation. And then what does it seem like happens to everybody who was content driving with you before? Do other people see that example and then they are like, you know what? That doesn't seem like a bad idea maybe. Maybe I need to increase my speed and follow along. I always turn to Charlotte and I'll say this. I'll say it seems like stupidity has a gravitational pull, doesn't it? Right? You know how gravity works and it pulls these bodies into it and they start getting into the same rotation. And I think that stupidity, and I would say in this case, sin, seems to have a gravitational pull. When one person is sinning, it seems like it goes further than just one person, and it almost invites others to partake and to join in, even if it's in little ways. But we see that sin seems to have a ripple effect or a gravitational pull to it. Paul writes in Romans 5:12, he says, therefore, just as sin came into the world through one man, and death through sin, right? There's that ripple effect. And so death spread to all men because all sinned. That's that spreading, that gravitational pull. Because of this one event, now it has tainted everybody else around it. All right, let's keep going on. We're going to move into Joshua chapter 8 now, verse 1. And we're going to see this defeat, this failure now move into victory for Joshua. We're seeing one of the few times that Joshua and his group, the Israelites, his army, actually fail. Verse 1, and the Lord said to Joshua, do not fear and do not be dismayed. Those are great words, right? Whenever God tells you, do not fear, that means, okay, it's time to start smiling. Take all the fighting men with you and arise and go up to Ai. See, I have given into your hand the king of Ai and his people, his city, and his land. So do not fear. He says, do not be dismayed. Do not be dismayed, but continue on is what he's saying. Take all the people. He wants everybody to be present to see this great work that he's doing. Not just a contingent, everybody needs to go. And he says, I have already given. It's a done deal. Verse 2, and you shall do to Ai and its king as you did to Jericho and its king. Only its spoil and its livestock you shall take as plunder for yourselves. Lay an ambush against the city behind it. So that would have been, you guys are seeing one of those great cases right there where the verse marker was not properly applied, right? Because that would have been a perfect place. You shall take as plunder for yourselves. New verse marker. Now, lay an ambush against the city behind it. Anyways, I should get off of that high horse. My point is this: when we look at chapter divisions and verses divisions, we know that these are men who've come historically and they've met as a group and said, here are these divisions. But every now and then when we read the Bible, sometimes it feels like when you start one chapter, it's continuing the previous chapter's thought for maybe a couple more verses. And then you see there's that clean break of, okay, I think the chapter marker should have been in this place here. And we just know that some of those verse markers aren't exactly perfect in their place where they land. And you can see, oh, I wonder what the choice was to put it there. But anyway, so now we get these instructions: lay an ambush against the city behind it. So Joshua and all of the fighting men arose to go up to Ai, and Joshua chose 3,000 mighty men of valor and sent them out by night. Sent them out. So they had to march 15 miles from Gilgal to Ai. Verse 4, and he commanded them, behold, you shall lie in ambush against the city, behind the city. Do not go very far from the city, but all of you remain ready. So now what are they trying to do? What do you think is the purpose of sending this contingent of people to lie behind the city itself? What are they trying to do? Yes. Yeah. They're pinching them off, right? Come on out so we can get behind you and pinch you off. You can't get back to your city, and now you're between our two forces, right? What was the mistake that they first did with Ai? Why did they fail with Ai? Other than starting with the Lord first, what did they do strategically that was wrong? They didn't take enough people, right? The reports from the spies were underestimating what the force was in Ai, right? So now what are they doing, Jessica? It's overkill now, right? Yeah, it's overkill. Okay, what turned out to be 10,000 men in Ai, let's see. We'll just triple that to put that amount of people behind them, and then we even have our greater army in front of them. Okay. Verse 5, is that where we're at? And I and all the people who are with me will approach the city, and when they come out against us, just as before, we shall flee before them. Okay, what are they doing here? What is this technique that they're doing in military terms? Drawing the enemy out by feigning weakness, right? Weakness and fear. In boxing terms, this is the rope-a-dope. This is where it's like, oh, you've hit me too much. I'm too weak, right? This is the Rocky special. I actually enjoy being hit. Joke's on you, right? Okay. Verse 6, and they will come out after us until we have drawn them away from the city, for they will say, they are fleeing from us, just as before, so we will flee before them. So now this is playing on, because we're talking about confidence and overconfidence, right? And it's playing on their overconfidence. We've done this to them once before. We're going to do the same thing again. Isn't this exactly the same trap that Joshua fell into when he first started this attack with Ai? Overconfidence, right? Look what we did to Jericho. Let's just steamroll right into Ai. We can do the same thing again. It's that overconfidence. That's hard though, isn't it? Especially when you have success. Right? Isn't that hard when you guys have success with something like that? Do you guys know of situations like that in life? Have you seen that? Having overconfidence and thinking, I think I can just go out in my own strength on this, or I don't think I need to do all of the due diligence that I did before. Have you guys ever seen that before? Yeah? Yeah. I've seen it. I've been a victim to it before, even in ministry. I know when I first came to Nazarene Bible College, I'd left my home church in Rochester Hills, Michigan. And I tell you guys, because Pastor Christy is like, tell me exactly what happened. You hear the disbelief, like, what? Okay, in March, when I first decided, Lord, take my life. I want to serve you. I want to follow this calling into ministry. And so our church says, why don't you take over junior hires? 5 junior hires. This is March. By July, we were running 70 junior hires. All these families were starting to come to our church. And we were like, what is going on? Well, I thought, this is how it was done. You know, you just start handing out ministry and bringing people in, and you do this and you'll do that, and you know, you end up playing the role of kind of ringmaster. And I thought that's essentially what you do. You're just ringmaster. And so when I went to Nazarene Bible College, now I'm in Colorado, and I'm at a Wesleyan church. This is the same church that my wife and her family are at. For those of you guys who don't know, Charla started out in my youth group. My wife was in my youth group. Most people are like, oh my goodness, that's scandalous. I couldn't stand that little jerk back then. It was her brother who was like my favorite teen in the world. He was a junior hire. He was so funny and just so full of energy and just a sweet kid, Davy. And I thought with this youth group, well, there's 10 kids here. What can I do with 10 kids? Let's do this same thing again. And so I started trying to repeat the formula that worked for me in Michigan, and nothing. I started that youth group with 12 kids, and I ended that youth group with 12 kids. Nothing happened, and I was truly, truly flummoxed. I was upset. I was upset with myself. I was upset with God. Really, what's going on here? But it's that case of thinking, okay, you can do the same formula again and again and always get the same result. That's overconfidence, and that's reliance on yourself. And that's what God is saying. That's going to get you in the end, and that's what's getting I here. All right, moving on. Are we in verses 8 through 9? All right. And as soon as you have taken the city, you shall set the city on fire, and you shall do according to the word of the Lord. See, I have commanded you. So Joshua sent them out, and they went to the place of ambush and lay between Bethel and Ai, and to the west of Ai. But Joshua spent that night among the people. What is this counter to? Whose story is this counter to? The commander with his people. David, right? When David has his huge falling down, his huge sin with Bathsheba, where is he not? He's not with his forces, right? He's at home. Okay, now another thing here, from a military standpoint, what are the Israelites doing that modern, even into Roman times, would be counterintuitive to do? What are the Israelites doing? They did it first with Jericho, and now they're doing it with Ai. And it seems counterintuitive when you've just conquered a place. What do you think? Brian, do you know? Destroying it, right? What were the Romans famous for when they conquered a people? Yeah. We're going to take your people, we're going to teach them how to be good Romans, and this is now going to become a Roman city, right? Why not? I mean, the walls are already built, there's a fortress there. But here, God is telling them, just like Jericho, it needs to be completely destroyed. All of it gone. Okay. Verse 10 through 14. Joshua rose early in the morning and mustered the people and went up, and he and the elders of Israel before the people of Ai. I read that way too quick and did not pace that out as well. And all the fighting men who were with him went up and drew near before the city and encamped on the north side of Ai, with a ravine between them and Ai. And he took about 5,000 men and set them in ambush between Bethel and Ai, to the west of the city. So they stationed the forces, the main encampment that was north of the city, and its rear guard to the west of the city. But Joshua spent the night in the valley. And as soon as the king of Ai saw this, he and all his people, the men of the city, hurried and went out early to the appointed place toward the Arabah to meet Israel in battle. But he did not know that there was an ambush against him behind the city. It's interesting here. The comment in this commentary says this: those who are in the most danger are the least aware of it. How so? Becky, you nod at that. How so do you think? It just makes sense. It seems like common sense. Okay. How so do you guys think? Those who are in the most danger are probably the people least aware of it. So what's the opposite? Tell me that. What's the opposite of that? The people in least danger are the people most aware of the danger around them, right? Yeah. It would almost come into this, Zeb, as a financial advisor, people with an emergency plan and an emergency finances, right, in the ready, do they ever encounter an emergency? Far less, right? Because they're ready to respond to it. They're prepared for.
It's not that the plan itself, well, so I think it was MacArthur, he was very famous for saying, plans themselves are useless
Uh-huh.
because plans change. But the process of planning itself, that's the value. The fact that you took the time to go through the planning, and again, this is not just finance, it's military, anywhere else.
Yeah.
It forces you to think about all of the potential outliers, the externalities, the different things that could happen. And if you never made a plan at all, you didn't even think down one path, let alone 10.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And this leads to my brain, like you say stuff like that, if in talking about General MacArthur, talking about the shortcomings of having plans. And Mike Tyson's famous quote, right? Everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. That was Mike Tyson. That's what he said about people who came in saying, oh, I've got a plan for this guy. Right. That plan is good right about the time until I punch you. And then the other part of that, oh my goodness, my brain. Don't fail me now, brain. Oh boy, I can't pull myself out of this hole. All right, we're just going to continue on instead of seeing my brain try and grasp what I just had 20 seconds ago. Those who are in the most danger are the least aware of it. That's what it was. There is a technique whenever you plan to do something, whether it's a big event, and I like this exercise. It's basically where you bring this big event that you've never done before, and you bring it to a group of people, and it's usually your pastoral staff, and you say, here's this idea that I have, this grand idea. Now let's talk about all the ways that this thing can fail. And there's a nice little Latin term for it, and I forget it now. I know in Latin it would be mori, right? The death of this thing. So let's have a meeting about how this thing dies. Because if we know all the ways that this plan can die, guess what we can start doing? We can start countering those ways, right? And we have a plan. All right, let's keep going. Verse 15. And Joshua and all Israel pretended to be beaten before them and fled in the direction of the wilderness. So all the people who were in the city were called together to pursue them. And as they pursued Joshua, they were drawn away from the city. Not a man was left in Ai or Bethel who did not go out after Israel. They left the city open and pursued Israel. Then the Lord said to Joshua, stretch out the javelin that is in your hand toward Ai, for I will give it into your hand. And Joshua stretched out the javelin that was in his hand toward the city. All right, so that action right there, taking that javelin, is that a defensive posture that Joshua is now taking? No, this is an attack posture. Now, it's funny because think about who we're talking about who is doing this thing. And we have to call back to Exodus chapter 17. And so if somebody could pull up Exodus chapter 17, verses 12 through 13. Who is Joshua and what was he doing? What's that, Pastor Melody? Use the microphone? Sure, yeah, thank you. For the reader? Oh, right. Does somebody have that in front of them and can read? Yeah, Yvonne? 12 through 13.
When Moses' hand grew tired, they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it. Aaron and Hur held his hands up, one on one side, one on the other, so that his hands remained steady until sunset. So Joshua overcame the Amalekite army with the sword.
Okay. Yvonne, that story, what is Moses holding up? Dick, your name is not Yvonne. So think about this, you guys. Okay, so for those of you guys who know that Bible story, that account, Moses and the Israelites, they are victorious in battle as long as what happens? Moses can hold the staff up, right? He's holding it up so long, what eventually starts happening to him? He's getting fatigued and tired, right? And so what do the men realize they need to do? Hold his arms up, right? Hold his arms up. Who was fighting that battle, earning the victory while that staff was being held up? Joshua. So think about that now. Right now they're going into battle, and God says, hold this javelin up and point it towards Ai. Joshua was there with Moses. He remembers this story. What do you think Joshua believes he needs to do the whole time? Hold the javelin up. You keep it held up until God tells you to lower it, right? Okay, let's see what Joshua does if he remembers this. Verse 19, and the men in ambush rose quickly out of their place, and as soon as he had stretched out his hand, they ran and entered the city and captured it. And they hurried to set the city on fire. So when the men of Ai looked back, and they saw the smoke of the city going up to heaven, and they had no power to flee this way or that, for the people who fled to the wilderness turned back against the pursuers. And when Joshua and all Israel saw that the ambush had captured the city, and that the smoke of the city went up, then they turned back and struck down the men of Ai. And the others came out from the city against them, and so they were in the midst of Israel, some on this side and some on that. And Israel struck them down until there was left none that survived or escaped. But the king of Ai they took alive and brought him near to Joshua. When Israel had finished killing all of the inhabitants in Ai in the open wilderness where they pursued them, and all of them to the very last had fallen by the edge of the sword, all Israel returned to Ai and struck it down with the edge of the sword. Did I read that twice? Okay. And all who fell that day, both men and women, were 12,000, all of the people of Ai. For Joshua did not draw back his hand for which he stretched out the javelin until he had devoted all of the inhabitants of Ai to destruction. Only the livestock and the spoil of the city Israel took as their plunder, according to the word of the Lord that he commanded Joshua. How long do you think Joshua had to hold that javelin up? Was this an hour? Was this 2 hours? 12,000 people to the sword, right? Quickly, because Joshua's holding up the javelin? It's true. It's true. You start doing the math. Okay, right? Because we're talking hundreds of thousands of Israelites against 12,000. Right. So it could have been quick work. They would have had to be very systematic, though, I think. Okay, right? Yeah. But this could have gone more quickly than what we think. Yeah. But what was Joshua's behavior in that moment? I'm going to do what Moses showed me, right? I know how this goes. Okay. All right, since the men actually had to fight in this encounter, as compared to what battle? Jericho. They did not have to fight. The walls just fell down, right? Since the men actually had to fight, they earned their reward. They were given the spoils. If only Achan had just waited, right? If he'd only just waited. Okay. Verse 28. Joshua burned Ai and made it forever a heap of ruins, as it is to this day. And he hanged the king of Ai on a tree until evening. And at sunset, Joshua commanded And they took his body down from the tree and threw it at the entrance of the gate of the city and raised over it a great heap of stones, which stands there to this day. Paul says, cursed is anything that hangs on a tree. Now, he's quoting Deuteronomy here. Cursed is anything that hangs on a tree. Who for us hung on a tree? Jesus. And he took the curse of sin, right? Who did he take it for? Did he take it for himself? No, he took it for you and I. Cursed is anything that hangs on a tree. That was what awaited our Savior for our behalf. All right, Joshua 30. At that time, Joshua built an altar to the Lord and the God of Israel on Mount Ebal. So, we need to get into a little bit of study because here we're going to find these two mountaintops, these two hilltops that are very close to one another. Pastor Melody, I don't know, do you have the slide for this artwork? I don't know if I put it in. Yeah, there we go. Thank you. Okay, so here we go. We are talking about now Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim. And these are two mountains that are going to hold a place of importance for the Israelites. Down beneath them is a town called Shechem, which we should pay attention to and remember here. No, it's okay. I think I can do it. Can you guys see it okay? Kind of. It's like the scrunched version. Yeah, that works. So these are two hilltops here. 600 years earlier, Abraham built his first altar here. This is where Jacob was fleeing Laban, and he carried the teraphim and his father-in-law's stolen goods, and everybody was chasing after him. This is where Joseph sought his brothers before going to Dothan, where he was sold into slavery, and where it is said he was buried. This is where Jacob dug a well, and where Jesus met the Samaritan woman. Was all here in this place, Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim. And you can tell by looking at this chart that if that's the town nestled in this valley, that these two hilltops aren't that big, right? These aren't like Rocky Mountains. These are, I believe, do we have the elevation? 3,000 feet on one and nearly 3,000 feet on the other. Mount Ebal is the hilltop where the curses are pronounced, and Gerizim are where the blessings are pronounced. And from there we get this story that the the tribes are separated, and some will go up on the mountain of curses, and some will go up on the mountain of blessing, and they will call down blessings and curses from them. But the altar is set up at the bottom of Mount Ebal, the mountain that they use to shout down curses. Why would the altar be established there and not at the one where the blessing is proclaimed? Why do you think? It makes me think of a famous line from Hamlet. Hamlet is plotting on his uncle who has killed his father, pouring poison in his ear, right, and killing him. And from that moment where his father died, his uncle rushes in and quickly marries Hamlet's mother, the queen, and basically usurps his father's life. Hamlet comes to find out, he learns that his uncle has done this through nefarious means, right? This is, for those of us who don't know the story of Hamlet well, we know The Lion King, which is the Disney version of Hamlet. But during this, Hamlet, the prince, comes back home and he learns of everything that's happened. And so he's now plotting, how do I get back at my uncle? How do I exact this revenge? And he's about to exact revenge and kill his uncle when he hears his uncle in his room saying nightly prayers. And that stalls and stops Hamlet's hand from killing his uncle. Because Hamlet doesn't want to do what? What do you think? Why would hearing his uncle pray stop Hamlet from killing him? Mel, do you know? Wouldn't want to curse on him? No. Hamlet explains it in the play, and he says this: if I were to kill him in the middle of prayers, then I'd send him to heaven. Why would I do that? Right? I'd rather kill him when he's in the middle of some sin. That way I know I'm dooming him to hell. Why is the altar set up at the base of the mountain that holds the curses of the Israelites? Their shortcomings, their failures. Why is the altar there and not where the blessing is? It's to give a means to redeem the curse, right? That's why it's there. It's because whenever you call out this means for sin, this failure that you have, God always has to provide a way to redeem it. And we see that right at the beginning. We see that even with the story of Adam and Eve, that we see this sacrificial practices put into place even as they're covering themselves with figs, right? They're trying through human efforts to cover up their sin and their shame. And God says, no, I have to make a way for you. And so he covers them instead with what? Animal skins, right? And it's the first practice of sacrificial law. God stepping in and trying to make a way for sin. And we see that's the same way here between these two mountaintops. Why at Ebal would the altar be set up there? Because whenever sin is present, there has to be a form of redemption. Okay, let's continue on. Joshua 8:31. Just as Moses, the servant of the Lord, had commanded the people of Israel, as it is written in the book of the law of Moses, an altar of uncut stones upon which no man has wielded an iron tool. And they offered on it burnt offerings to the Lord and sacrificed peace offerings. Okay, unhewn stones. Unhewn stones. You can find this, why these are called into place for the first time. You see this in Exodus and in Deuteronomy it's brought up, and then we see it here. That's because with God's workmanship, something that God is doing, he doesn't even want it to be polluted by anything that has to do with man's effort. When you make this altar, the stones cannot be touched and cut by man. They have to be natural stones. This peace offering, and we get into it here. I have a link, you guys. If for those of you who have access to the digital notes, I give a whole separate document that looks at the peace offering. But what this peace offering is, it's actually a shared meal between God, the priests, and the people. Usually on an offering, you think that would be sacrificed for God and then laid out. And then every now and then we see that there are some left over and the priests get it. But this one, the people actually participated in this along with the priests and along with God, each one of them taking their own portion of that sacrifice. And there in the presence of the people of Israel, he wrote on the stones a copy of the law of Moses, which he had written. So, why is it that Joshua brings out the law once the altar has been established? We're already kind of talking about it a little bit when we talk about the purpose of Mount Ebal. But why do we think that it is now in this time that Joshua is bringing out the law of the Lord? Why is this the appropriate time and not before? What had to be present at the mountain of curses? What was at the base of this mountain? Stones, the altar, right? Isn't it funny that until an altar is built, that the law doesn't come out and is not being read for everybody? Whenever you highlight the sins of people for God, whenever you highlight the sins, you have to provide a way to redeem the people, to make a way to make their sins right. So until that altar is built, it wouldn't have been right for the law to have been read. Because if the law would have been read without an altar being established for the priests to do their priestly duties, and you read the law, how would everybody have been living in that time, in that moment? In sin, right? What is it said about the law? The law wasn't given to redeem, it was given to what? It was given to highlight and prove our sin. In itself, it is not a means of redemption. You're going to fail the law. The law was meant to highlight your sin. Let's continue on. Joshua chapter 8, verse 33. And all Israel, sojourner as well as native, with their elders and officers and their judges, stood on the opposite side of the ark before the Levitical priest, who carried the ark of the covenant of the Lord, half of them in the front of Mount Gerizim, half of them in the front of Mount Ebal, just as Moses, the servant of the Lord, had commanded at the first, to bless the people of Israel. So Israel is divided up into two groups, and we see this happening between the two groups. It says this, that they're divided this way. Simon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Joseph, and Benjamin, those tribes all go to Mount Gerizim, the Mount of Blessing. These are all the tribes that were the sons of either Rachel or Leah, even Leah with her weak eyes, right? Rachel or Leah. So these are all her sons are on that mountaintop. Reuben, Gad, Asher, Zebulun, Dan, Naphtali, they all went to Mount Ebal, the Mount of Cursings. And these were the sons born of the handmaids of Rachel and Leah. This is Zilpah and Bilhah, those brothers who had them as their mothers. Except for two cases, these are exceptions that don't follow that rule. Their mother was either Rachel or Leah, and the two brothers or the two tribes were Reuben and Zebulun. Zeb, I'm sorry to say, there's no reason for it. Zebulun, by all accounts, shouldn't have gone to that mountain. There is nothing wrong with the tribe of Zebulun to have to go to Mount Ebal. This is one of those unknown things. Why did Zebulun have to go to Mount Ebal, the Mount of Curses, as their place of worship? It kept the numbers even, sorry, but this is how you break a dozen, right? With Reuben, we understand because Reuben forfeited his status as firstborn by sinning against his father and sleeping with his father's handmaid, okay? Reuben forfeited his birthright. But we see in here, it doesn't make sense why Zebulun had to go that way. All right, let's keep going. We covered already the idea of the law was not read until there was an altar. There must be a remedy present for any failure to keep the law. Then we're going to get to Shechem. Shechem is not in this chapter when we're really going to get to the importance of it, so we'll keep going. The ark is not mentioned in the book of Joshua from here on out, now that the law has been read to the assembly. Why? I don't know. When I ask you guys why do you suppose we don't hear of the ark anymore from this point on? Doesn't it seem like it was brought out as some sort of token of victory, though? Some assurance? Kind of in a sense that God was traveling with the army by carrying the ark and having everybody march in front of it. And this was part of the strategy at Jericho. But from here on out, we're not going to hear of the ark. Why do you guys think that is? Do you have any guesses? Yeah? Okay, that this could have potentially maybe have always gone with them. I was almost thinking when you first said that, maybe it's not mentioned again because God doesn't want it to become this idol for them, even though it's considered the the throne of God, right? I looked back to Melody like Melody was going to be nodding. Yes. All right, verse 34. Then after he read all the words of the law, the blessing and the curse, according to all that is written in the book of the law. Um, our nice commentary here, it goes after Seventh-day Adventists. It is interesting that some groups who are drawn to put themselves under the law as Seventh-day Adventists are. How are Seventh-day Adventists living under the law, you guys? Observing the Sabbath. The Sabbath happens on a Friday night, right? And ends on Saturday night. Yes, that is a part of their, even as we'd call them as Christians, they hold to that law, right? It says, it's interesting, some groups that are drawn to put themselves under the law rarely include the cursings with the blessings. We are not under the law. Read the book of the letter of Galatians to understand how we are no longer under the law, right? Who are we under? We're under grace through Christ. Yeah. Verse 35. There was not a word of all that Moses commanded that Joshua did not read before the assembly of Israel, and the women and the little ones and the sojourners who lived among them. What does reading God's word look like for you? All right, let's end there. We've got about 10 minutes. Is anything standing out to you? Is anything kind of jumping off the page? Any questions that you have, or anything striking you as being something of interest here? Mm-hmm.
Just thinking back on it, I would imagine early in that time, after 4 years of languishing in slavery, you come out and it's like, okay, he's God, but is he really?
Yeah.
So having something like the ark and to show the power of it, to me seems an easy way to convince people like, hey, this is really it. But then you get a decade, 2, 3, 4 decades out, it's like, no, he proved himself. We don't need this boss.
Oh, I love that thought. Yeah, I love that. Because you could worry that it could become an idol, right? Yeah, but we don't need that crutch anymore because we have his presence, right? We have his blessing with us. Okay, I like that. Yeah, especially coming out of Egyptian culture. Yeah, Dick?
I was just thinking, when Moses came down from the mountain and found the golden calf, didn't he make them grind it up and eat it?
Yeah.
Why was the gold buried in that under? Why? It seems like it would have been a temptation in later years for someone to dig up a chunk of gold for 50 shekels.
Are we talking about Achan? Is that what we're... Okay. I don't know. I don't know. I know that God lives out through. He shows himself within the personality of his human counterpart that he's using at that time. And so that was Moses's. That was something that would fall in line with Moses. This is a different era, though, now with Joshua, where Moses was the law. Joshua is a little bit different than the law, isn't he? He's a battle chief. Yeah, and we're about to enter into a time of battle chiefs, otherwise known as what? Judges. Yeah, judges. These aren't kings. These are literally just war chiefs. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that would be a decent amount of reading. Oh boy, don't make me do it, Mark. I'm going to stall for time just as we're talking here. Now, it could have been that he was just reading potentially Leviticus. It could be a portion of it that would contain the law. The fact that, so it wouldn't include Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy is basically just retelling the end of recounting Moses's and their journey. Mm. What's that? They had that at that point because we know that Moses is counted, right? Yeah. All right. I'm looking to find. I do have how long it would take if you were to read certain books of the Bible. Um, we'll say this. Any other questions? Yeah. Do you like that? No, there's something there, right, in the raising of your arms. Yeah. Yeah. Isn't it funny that what they did for us would have been the posture of worship, right? Yeah. 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 And I'll say I fall in line with that discomfort sometimes too. I get really shy sometimes because despite my being, a hellion as a kid, I am a good Nazarene at heart. And part of that Nazarenedom seems like it's shyness, right? We don't clap very enthusiastically, hardly ever on beat. Yeah. You don't want to draw attention, right? Yeah. 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 Mm-hmm. Yeah. What I loved about that too in there is that there is a confidence in Joshua because it doesn't say anything in the moment that he lifts the javelin. It doesn't say and he determined at that time to keep the javelin raised for the entirety of the battle. It isn't until the battle's done that you learn that he held it up the whole time, which is just kind of that confirmation where he had belief, that the Lord was with him in that action. Right? He was confident in the Lord. In answer to your question, the reading of the law, Leviticus would take us approximately at 24,500 words, would take 3 hours and 9 minutes. Exodus would take 4 hours and 11 minutes. So, yeah. All right. You guys, any other questions? Okay. Dick, how many times are you going to drop that Bible of yours? You know what? You're going to you're going to have to pray us out, Mr. Dick.
Father, we thank you for your Holy Spirit's leading tonight in our enlightenment, learning so much about your word. May we hide it in our hearts, Lord, but not to the point that we can't use it in witnessing to others. Thank you for the time we've had together tonight and for the meal. And we ask your blessing on the remainder of our week. Amen.